Brother I. Now it's time for us to have a look at character powers, specifically traits. Well, character powers and traits are synonymous with each other, but I feel it's very important to have a look at these because they are critical to Injustice 2. Every single character has or will have a character power. Some will have multiple character powers. Whether the changes are slight or drastic, character powers are going to be a big part of this game when you are learning how to play it. It's a very simple truth. So now we're going to have a look at one of its downfalls.
Batman.
And it's a very common problem across the cooldown system. And, well, I just said it. Cooldowns. Specifically with characters that use traits like Superman and Batman. They are the two most common sorts of traits. You'll notice how Superman has a trait bar at the bottom with a red light. When he activates trait, he gets a slight damage boost and the ability to break through armor like I munch on Nanaimo bars, which is to say, very, very easily. Now, from there, you'll notice that there's a bit of a time before he can use it again, and that's fair. But watch what happens when I clash with Batman. You'll note, once this intro is done,
this world is mine,
that I did not use the character powers just to give you a little bit of an idea as to, clash and stuff. It's a cinematic event, same with transitions and super moves. Now watch what happens when Superman pops trait and goes for a clash.
Ready for more?
Actually, I'm not.
He's forced to go into cooldown and his trait ends. Now watch what happens when I try and do a clash when his trait is still in cooldown.
This won't end well for you.
This world is mine.
Can you guess what happens? The cooldown resets. And this is a big problem across many characters, not just Superman. We're talking about Black Adam, Deadshot, Aquaman, and characters that have single bar traits like Superman. And you'll notice Batman is similar, except he has 3 bars. It's kind of a 3-cell system, and he shares a similar but interesting problem with Superman, and is also tied to Firestorm, and to an extent with Captain Cold. You'll notice when I use the bats, there's a cooldown period for each individual bat. So no matter what, once one bat is cooled down, I can pop a bat and use that bat while another bat cools down. But when I do a cinematic event, something rather interesting happens. The cooldown for the second bat resets, but I can still use the first bat. Now this is very useful for characters that have cells, like Batman and Firestorm, because even if one of their cells is broken from a cinematic event, they can still use the weaker version. Firestorm can still use a level 2, even if he's denied a level 3 version of his trait. It's super useful to keep in mind because, well, not all characters have single bar power-ups, and this inherently makes 3-cell characters a little bit stronger because they can get around an inherent problem with the cooldown system in that it resets after every single cinematic event in the game. A transition, a super move, a clash, that sort of thing. But they'll at least be able to keep at least one part of it regardless of this cooldown problem. Now I mentioned Captain Cold a little bit earlier, and that's because Captain Cold is similar to Batman and Firestorm, except his trait is manual. You have to hold it down in order to make things work. And I accidentally trigger an ice grenade, but that's not exactly the point. The point here is that you manually grow your trait. You manually gain cells. So if you're stuck almost at level 2 and trigger a stage transition, well, you're basically going to have to reset that charge because your cooldown, in quotes, for the second cell resets. So you have to re-enter the second cell manually. And this is interesting because there's another weird thing about some of the characters in Injustice 2. More specifically, a sort of exception. Scarecrow. Scarecrow's Fear Toxin trait allows him to use any Fear Toxin-based moves, including his meter burn hook, in order to gain meter as long as the little wavy things are active. And now that I have almost full Fear Toxin, almost enough to engage trait. If I activate trait again, I have Traumatize. Watch what happens when I clash here.
Getting cold feet?
This isn't over yet.
Scarecrow keeps where he is, where he has his fear bar, no matter the cinematic event, whether it's a clash, transition, or super move. And this is key because if you're a Scarecrow player, you're uniquely unhindered by cinematic events, whereas most characters have at least a partial problem. And now that I have access to Traumatize, however, something interesting happens when I trigger super move. Once super move is triggered, it counting as a cinematic event, removes Traumatize and forces you to reset. This is the main weakness, is that you lose Traumatize as soon as you engage in a clash or transition or super move. But once you activate Fear Gas and the white bar grows, you're safe. You're safe to continue doing cinematic events as many times as you wish, and you still don't really lose progress. You only lose progress once you activate Traumatize. It's a really key thing to know about Scarecrow players, to keep an eye on their fear trait. And just as well, Scarecrow does not have cooldown on his fear trait activation, so he can literally activate it as many times as he wants in the middle of a fight without having to worry about cooldown. The only real cooldown that exists is when he's actually doing stuff with his trait. Like when he's actually gassing people, he can't just randomly activate it again. Now, Supergirl and Brainiac are also very interesting cases in that their trait naturally regenerates. You can see with Supergirl, her beams kind of regen over time as I'm doing stuff. Now watch what happens when I trigger a cinematic event. Psych, I missed! But now watch what happens when I engage Super Move. Bam! Off we go! Once she makes the round trip around the sun, you'll have noticed that it was still regenning to a slight degree until the cinematic actually kicked in. The regen stopped, but it did not reset. In theory, it's possible for Supergirl, when she's close enough to having her super eye laser thing full, to trigger super move or transition, and while the animation to get it started goes, be refilled right back up to the top. And Brainiac can do one better in this regard. Brainiac's trait is interesting in that he can hold the trait and then engage in a cinematic event like a super. And while the cinematic event goes off, as you saw, the beta flew off over Supergirl's head. Watch his trait. Something crazy happens. It recovered during the entire duration of the cinematic. And this will happen anytime a cinematic occurs, including during a clash. So if there's a clash and he's stuck on betas, and he goes into clash while holding the beta will fly over their heads. A little bit of trash talk. And then, once the clash is done, the trait will be almost completely, if not completely, filled by the time it is done, allowing Brainiac, to re-engage with the beta mind game all over again. Now, there are some characters that I did kind of miss, specifically stance change characters like Red Hood, Robin with the Grayson Staff ability, and Blue Beetle. And what just happens is that if they get in a clash, it just resets them back to their natural state. So Blue Beetle, for instance, would be back in Bladeless stance, Robin would be back in Sword stance, that kind of thing.
Bane.
And there's one more slightly problematic character, a character who specifically suffers from this problem, as well as Green Arrow, Bane. Now we all know what Bane's trait does. It gives him armor and projectile immunity at level 3 while buffing his damage. But when it cools off, he goes into withdrawal, which, as the more venom is used, the longer the cooldown is. And watch what happens, RKO out of nowhere, when Bane activates his super move while on the effects of venom. The damage is increased, but it auto-engages the cooldown. Now, what's interesting is that even at the different levels of venom, when you almost run out of juice, you will actually engage in the level 2, level 3, level 1, whatever, for Bane's Venom damage boost. Even if it should have run out right here, he's still doing level 2 Venom damage in the super move because of a weird Venom lock, as I call it, that engages. You can even see that he was still glowing while it was active. Now with a cinematic event, you'll notice that the cooldown, like with Superman, Deadshot, or Black Adam, it resets. But with Bane, that's especially dangerous because he'll still be under the effects of, shall we say, withdrawal, meaning he'll still take more damage from the Venom withdrawal, and he'll still be slower. And he can be forced into this as many times as you engage in a cinematic event. Super move, withdrawal. Transitions, withdrawal. Clash, withdrawal. Bane suffers big time from these problems, and he can be forced into this with any sort of cinematic event. Keep in mind that cinematic events like transitions and X-rays, while he's high on Venom, will be reduced because the Venom damage reduction is still active during those. Another character who suffers from this is the poor bastard who's getting beat up right now, Green Arrow, and I'll explain why. Hello, people! I forgot that SHAREfactory has a very, very weird hidden limit to audio clips that it can let me record, so I'm going to have to jump through a few hoops in order to continue my explanation. Now, with Green Arrow, what his whole deal is with his arrows. He can fire them and create new arrows, like for instance, fire arrows, electric arrows, ice arrows, and the almighty boxing glove arrow. But when a cinematic event kicks in, the arrow goes away. Even if you put it in storage, the arrow will go away, and you're forced to basically reload that armory. It's not that big of a deal, but it's something I've noticed that makes me go, huh, really worth noting there. As far as I know, that's about it for traits, at least for now. We'll have to see how Sub-Zero's trait kind of works, whether it's like a standard bar a bar trait like Superman, or a cell trait like Batman, or if there's something weird going on with it like Scarecrow, Blue Beetle, or Brainiac. I'm really curious to see what they do with it, and I hope you enjoy this little like rambling about random bullshit about the traits in Injustice 2. I know a lot of those people who are going to be watching this are like, I already fucking know this shit. Why are you telling me that? But I figured, well, sometimes it's always good to just be like, hey, these are the rules. It's good to be like, well, wait, why am I still in withdrawal as Bane? I should have cooled down 3 times by now. That's why cinematic events and traits do not mesh. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always,